In 393, sadly, the library was a shadow of its former self. Fires had destroyed tens of thousands of the precious scrolls that preserved some of the best ancient texts. No one is exactly sure when the most destructive fires occurred. Maybe Julius Caesar's invasions started the fire. Maybe it was the Emperor Aurelian in his war against Zenobia. These are two who have traditionally been blamed for great fires. But though many scrolls had been destroyed, the library still stood to serve scholars who came to study. Religious changes in Alexandria also damaged the library. Some early Christian leaders were suspicious of the pagan origins of the library, and Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, in about 400, destroyed a branch of the library called the Temple of Serapis. The temple held about 10% of the library's holdings, and Theophilus converted the temple into a Christian church. The most serious destruction of the library came in the 7th century, when Muslim conquerors chose to destroy classical knowledge. There was no necessary tension between Neoplatonists and Christians, even though, since 392, paganism had been declared illegal in the Roman Empire. Philosophers had no reason to fear reprisals, and there was no particular religious reason for Hypatia to run into trouble. Another source, however, says that when Cyril was passing Hypatia's house, he saw many people gathered in front. When he asked what was going on, he was told it was the house of Hypatia the philosopher, and that she was going to emerge to speak to them. Cyril was struck with envy at her popularity, and he began to plot her murder. Either way, we can see the stage was set for disaster. For Christians, Hypatia represented an old order, when civic governors were in charge and ideas were freely discussed. This seemed to detract from what they perceived was a new order in which bishops would guide the cities and their faithful. In 415, during Lent, their rage exploded. They built up their anger when they saw her returning home in her carriage. They surrounded her and dragged her out. They took her to a church called the Caesareum, where they stripped her naked and murdered her. The text says they tore her flesh off with ostrakos, which literally means oyster shells, but it can also be translated as tiles, and it usually is translated that way in modern accounts. It's hard to picture what went on here, but presumably she was mobbed and torn apart with sharp objects within the church. After they tore her to pieces, they took the remains of her body and burnt them. Socrates tells us that most people, including the emperor, blamed Bishop Cyril for this horrible deed. Even if he had not ordered the murder himself, the violence that he fomented certainly erupted in the streets of Alexandria to horrible results. But Cyril did not experience any repercussions from this murder. He served as an influential bishop for the next 30 years. 200 years after her death, John, the bishop of Nicaea, or Nitria, in the Egyptian desert, made Hypatia a serious threat to Christianity. He said she was devoted at all times to magic, astrolabes, and instruments of music, and she beguiled many people through her satanic wiles. He even accused her of beguiling Orestes through her magic. So her destruction was a victory of Christ over Satan, and he praised Cyril's role in this.